Hey guys, and welcome back to my channel, where today I've got a video about 4 Jane Doe cases that need some exposure. I know this format is slightly different from my usual, but all too often I come across Doe cases that I want to talk about, only to find there's too little information to make a whole video. So instead, in today's video, I'm going to cover a few different Jane Doe cases that have less information, and I also have some future videos planned where I do the same for some John Doe cases as well as a UK version for each of these. As I always request, if you lived in one of the areas I'm talking about in today's video at the time of the discovery, please pay extra close attention. Speak to friends and family who may have also been around at that time and just get the word out. Spread these stories. All it takes is for one person to recognise a composite sketch or an odd scar or a story, and a Doe can finally be reunited with their identity. Every single person out there had someone at some point, whether that was family, friends, a teacher, a cashier at the local shop they'd have a chat with whenever they popped in. I refuse to believe that anyone on this earth can be completely unrecognisable. There's always an answer, and all it takes is the right person seeing the right thing and you've got it. We're going to start with a Jane Doe who was identified by the police as only a case number 97-009, but it seems that on the internet she's been dubbed the name SoCal Jane Doe due to the area in which she was found. It was 2:15 p.m. on February 10, 1997, when a construction worker came across a body in the hills behind the Desert Crossing shopping centre, which is mainly a Target, I think, in Palm Desert, Riverside County, California, USA. He immediately contacted the police, and soon authorities descended down upon this very strange scene. Everything they found there only posed more questions as to who this woman was, and there were no answers. She was estimated to be between 40 and 55 years of age, a white female with greying shoulder-length brown hair and hazel eyes. She was 5'6" and weighed approximately 145 pounds. She was found fully dressed, and the list of clothing on the Doe network is as follows: blue denim jeans, a yellow windbreaker, tan underwear, white sleeveless shirt, white and tan shirt, tan jacket and tan bra. Now, this is obviously a lot of clothes to be found wearing, and it's not entirely clear if she was indeed wearing all of this at the time of discovery or if she just had some extra clothing in her possession. I'll elaborate on that in just a moment. Jane Doe also wore large frame prescription bifocal glasses, a yellow metal wedding ring on her left ring finger suggesting that she was married, and a clear amber pendant around her neck. She had cash in her pocket as well. It's also noted on Doe Network that she had pricey Clinique makeup on her face, but I'm not sure how they'd be able to tell such a thing unless they found specifically Clinique makeup at the site of her death as well, something which isn't noted anywhere as far as I could find. Jane Doe had no scars or tattoos and had had extensive dental work done in the past, including crowns and root canal work. She clearly took care of herself at some point in her life. Her body was not decomposed at all, her face was still completely recognisable, so she hadn't been dead for very long at the time of her discovery, likely only about 1 day. She had superficial contusions, so cuts and grazes on her head and legs. However, her autopsy results a few days later showed that she died due to heart disease. Nothing suspicious, she hadn't been murdered. The cuts were likely from where she'd collapsed and rolled a while down the hill. A search of the scene revealed a day camp set up slightly further up the hill from where Jane Doe had been found. There was a small collection of her belongings and some food, all of which only provided more questions than answers. There was a photograph of a beach, but the person in the photo had been cut out. They found a Hallmark birthday card, but the name of the person who had sent it had been torn off. They found a love letter addressed to no one that hadn't been finished, written in both English and Scottish Gaelic. It started with "Dear love of my heart" before fading into nothing and finishing with "Oh love of my heart" written in Gaelic. This camp is a reason why I'm not sure about the clothing situation, as I mentioned a second ago. Perhaps they found some of the clothing listed at the camp rather than actually on her person. They also found bus passes at the scene and a prescription bottle with the label torn off where it would have had her name. Anything that could have identified this woman was either missing or had been presumably purposefully destroyed. They drew up a composite of Jane Doe's face and shared it around, as Warren Horton, a retired deputy coroner who worked on this case, said, "It was like everyone knew her face, but no one knew her name." The lone article I could find written about this case doesn't elaborate too much more on that, so everything else I have to post to you about this story is speculation, questions that I personally have. The fact that Jane Doe was not only found with no identification, but anything that could have identified her or possible loved ones was destroyed suggests that she went to lengths to not be identified. But she wasn't murdered, nor did she commit suicide as far as the autopsy suggests. She died of heart disease and had clearly been going to the doctors about something, hence the prescription medication. Now, I assume that prescription medication was something to do with her heart disease, but I don't know that for sure. Nowhere says exactly what it was for. So for me, that poses a question of, did she know her death was imminent? If she had been told so by a doctor, surely they would do more for her than just prescribe some pills. The fact that she had a camp set up in the hills suggests that she was homeless, but the wedding band on her ring finger suggests that she did have a husband, at least at some point. Was the love letter found something she'd written intended for someone else, or was it a letter that someone else had written for her? And speaking of the letter, if she could maybe understand and or write Scottish Gaelic, that suggests that she may have been from Scotland and not native to the USA. Her body was never cremated, meaning that they could still do testing on her remains today if they wished to. But this whole idea of trying to identify a Doe who may not have wanted to be identified is quite a tricky moral question, and it's a question that I intend to get into more thoroughly in a future video I have planned. But without a note or anything explicitly saying that they don't want to be identified, what is the correct way for the authorities to proceed here? This woman clearly went to great lengths to remove her identity from everything that she owned at this camp. But if she knew she was going to die and she knew that in her death she didn't ever want anyone to know who she was, surely you'd think just write a note or something to leave there to be like, please just bury me, I don't want anyone to know that I'm dead. And that could save a lot of confusion, but instead you just don't know for sure. Maybe it was a coincidence that there was no identification found. Maybe she removed all of her identification from her person for another reason, not intending to die. Was she being hunted down by somebody? Was she paranoid about something? Maybe her and her husband were in an abusive relationship. Maybe she'd committed a crime and was on the run. There are so many possibilities that there's no way we can cover it all here. And with all that, there's not enough evidence to say that this woman wanted to be unidentified in her death. The Clinique makeup and extensive dental work here suggests this woman may have been from a fairly comfortable household. Maybe not hugely rich, but enough so that she could treat herself to makeup from the counters instead of the drugstore, and she could afford to get lots of dental work done. Which suggests at some point, in order to find herself homeless and setting up a camp in the desert hills, her life took a major downturn. If anyone has any information about who this woman could be or anything that could help lead to an identification, please contact the Riverside County Sheriff's Department in California. The fact that her face was recognisable when she was found suggests that the composite sketch circulated of her is fairly accurate, so if you recognise this woman, it might be someone you know. In each of these cases I'm going to be talking about, I'm going to leave the contact details of the correct authorities in the description box down below, just in case. Next, I'm going to talk about the case of Broadway St. Phoenix Jane Doe, whose case I actually think is incredibly close to being solved. The DNA Doe Project announced just last May in 2020 that her case is undergoing testing with them. The DNA Doe Project are a non-profit volunteer organisation who work towards identifying the unidentified using forensic genealogy. They've made many high-profile identifications in recent years, including that of Marsha King, aka Buckskin Girl, Lyle Stevick, whose family have requested that his identity remains private, Deborah Jackson, who was Orange Socks, and the Sumter County Does, James Freund and Pamela Buckley, amongst so many others. Broadway St. Phoenix Jane Doe is a Doe who seems to be on the precipice of identification. DNA Doe Project have been working on her case for quite a while, and they do seem to have made some genetic matches to distant cousins. They're still working on narrowing this case down further, and any leads at this point in time could really help them out immensely. It was just after midnight on the 21st November 2004 when Jane Doe was crossing the street at 15th Street and Broadway in Phoenix, Arizona, and she was hit by a car in a hit and run. She was discovered in the road just mere moments later. Her death was likely instant upon impact with the car, which was seen by witnesses fleeing from the scene shortly after. This was a seemingly normal woman hit by a car in what probably was a tragic accident, except she had no identification on her person at the time of her death. And in the 17 years since then, no one has come forward to say that their loved one of her description is missing, despite investigators doing all that they could. At the time of her death, Jane Doe was wearing green sweatpants and a flowered t-shirt. At the time of her autopsy, she was said to be white or possibly Hispanic, between 40 and 50 years old, 5'4" tall and weighing 158 pounds. She had short black hair and brown eyes, and her face remained fairly undamaged, so she was recognisable after this accident. Despite this, her remains are unidentified. Her dental records are available and her DNA has been entered into CODIS, so there are definitely multiple avenues for her to be identified here. She was also found to have illegible writing on the palm of her hand, and no matter how long I look at this, I cannot tell you what this says. Recent DNA analysis by the Doe Project suggests that both of her parents may have come from a city called Calvillo in Mexico, meaning that Jane Doe is a Hispanic woman, not Caucasian, as the autopsy suggested. Calvillo is a fairly small place, which should help immensely with tracking down family members. She may have family members who have no idea that she's even missing. Maybe she went to the USA and they think she just lost contact. And it would also explain why no one in the USA has seemed to recognise her. Maybe they think they've just lost touch, or maybe they have noticed she's missing but have faced language barriers. Even though I do know a huge amount of the USA does speak Spanish, Jane Doe's Mexican family might not have known where to start in reporting her as missing in a whole other country where they don't even speak the language. As I mentioned previously, the DNA Doe Project have made some promising connections in this case to distant cousins, which is definitely something, but there's a small caveat in this case in that there's a huge endogamy in this family tree, which is the practice of marrying within a specific social group or ethnicity. In the most basic of terms, this means that a lot of people in this community in Calvillo are related in some way, making it very hard for it to be narrowed down to a specific family tree that our Jane Doe belongs to. They've also released information on this Jane Doe in Spanish in an attempt to reach this community in Mexico. There's currently a reward of up to $5,000 for information leading to the arrest and or indictment of the suspects of this crime. Because of course this isn't just a case of an unidentified woman, they're not just looking for her name, they're also looking for the person that ran her over that day and rushed away from the scene, not even bothering to see if she was okay. I do wish I had more information about the police's opinion of this crime, whether they think it was an accident, as hit and runs most often are, and that the perpetrator was just a coward, or if this was a targeted hit. It seems like such a slim chance to me that the one woman who would be a victim of a hit and run on that night would be the one woman who had no ID on her, or anyone who would recognise her or even notice that she was missing. But then again, that's a slim chance, it's definitely not impossible. From what I can gather, it seems that the police do think it was an accident. Our next Jane Doe today is Yonkers Jane Doe, which is the name given to an unidentified woman who was found in Yonkers, Westchester County in New York. It was June 27th, 1992, when a worker from a pizzeria called I Love Pizza at 1288 Midland Avenue found a dismembered body in the alley behind the store. It was about a mile away from the New York Thruway. Various body parts were discovered in a number of plastic bags in a dumpster, although both of Jane Doe's arms and her right leg were missing, meaning that the police were never able to fingerprint her and search for an identity via that route. An autopsy revealed that she had only died about 1 day before she was found, and the cause of her death was homicide. Jane Doe's head had a gaping hole in the back, which was likely to be caused by an axe or a similar weapon. They were not able to determine if she'd been sexually assaulted. She was found wearing a short-sleeved light blue jean jacket and a size 32A white bra. Her estimated age was between 28 and 42 years old, and she's described as white, although I did see people speculating online that she may have been Hispanic. She was 5'7", 115 to 140 pounds, dark brown hair and hazel eyes. She did have quite a few distinguishing marks and features, including a tattoo of a butterfly on the back of her right shoulder and 2 cesarean section scars, one vertical and one transverse. This suggests that she had at least one child, probably 2. She had a scar in the middle of her left thigh, pierced ears, and the toes on her remaining foot were painted bright red, so you can probably assume that her right toes were as well. As Yonkers Jane Doe was never reported as missing, it's believed that she may have been a transient, and it's thought that she was a sex worker. And interestingly, in Yonkers Jane Doe's case, we actually do know the identity of her killer. Robert Shulman was a postal worker in his 40s who was known to pick up sex workers around Queens and take them back to his home in Hicksville, Long Island. He would then get high with them, usually on crack, have sex, and then bludgeon them to death and then dismember their bodies, before hiding the bodies in and around New York City. Shulman didn't go to huge efforts to hide the bodies, hence how police soon realised they had a serial killer on their hands. He was an active serial killer from 1991 to 1995, and it's thought that he had 5 victims in total, 2 of whom are still unidentified. We'll talk about the other unidentified victim momentarily. Shulman was arrested in 1996 after police found out about a man cruising around the area girls were missing from in a blue Cadillac. When they obtained the registration of said car, it was found to belong to Shulman's brother. They also found Shulman's last victim wrapped in a sleeping bag, which they traced back to Sears as they were the only manufacturer. They tried to find out if Shulman's brother Barry had a card at Sears, but he didn't. Instead, Robert did. That's how they first identified Robert Shulman as a suspect. And then women in the area started identifying him as the one driving the Cadillac around, and cadaver dogs then signalled possible remains as having been in this car. So the police searched his workplace and found evidence linking to the bodies. He was arrested in April 1996. At that point he confessed to 3 murders, but not that of Yonkers Jane Doe. That confession would actually come later. He was sentenced to death for his crimes, but that was later changed to life imprisonment, and he died in 2006 with 2 of his victims still unidentified. He eventually confessed the murder of Yonkers Jane Doe, saying he took her back to his apartment and they did crack cocaine together. He said that at some point he blacked out and then just found her dead on the floor when he came around. Nobody believes that. She was quite clearly killed by a blow to her head. He cut off her arms and right leg with a hacksaw before disposing of her body in the dumpster. Or at least he threw what was remaining of her body in the dumpster. The rest of her body parts have never been found. The fact that he just threw her body in a dumpster like she was nothing but rubbish just hits me so hard. That's what her entire life came down to for that man, and she deserves so much better than that. Yonkers Jane Doe deserves to be reunited with her identity. There must be someone out there who's wondering what happened to their daughter, sister, niece, mother. She was someone to someone at some point in time. The other unidentified victim of Shulman is commonly referred to as Medford Jane Doe, discovered on the 7th of December 1994 in Medford, New York, along the side of Long Island Avenue. She was found in a blue Rubbermaid garbage bin by an employee of the Suffolk County Department of Public Works, who at first thought her remains were just a load of gone-off meat. She was partially covered with plastic bags with a white towel or bath mat wrapped around her head. As with Yonkers Jane Doe, both her arms and a leg had been removed and were never recovered. Although in Medford's case, it was the left leg that was missing, not the right. She had blunt force trauma to her head and face and was found nude apart from the torn rim of a black sweater around her neck. The sweater was J.J. Cochran brand, size extra extra large. Shulman later admitted to killing Jane Doe in his room with a baseball bat before dismembering her with an axe and hacksaw. He scattered her body parts and her belongings around. He was unable to dispose of her body immediately apparently, so he sprinkled her body with baking soda to mask the smell. Although it seems we don't even have a composite sketch of Medford Jane Doe, we do have a description of her. She was estimated to be between 20 and 30 years old, white, 5 foot, 5'1", and about 135 pounds. She had reddish brown, shoulder-length hair that may have been dyed, and brown eyes. As for any distinguishing marks, she had a tattoo on her right shoulder of a red heart with a white banner that read Adrian. She had a well-healed injury to her right femur and a 4-inch long surgical scar on her abdomen. She also had double piercings in her earlobes. That's about all of the information we have about Medford Jane Doe. It doesn't seem like they've ever released a composite sketch of her, so this verbal description is sadly all we have to go on. It's thought that both Yonkers Jane Doe and Medford Jane Doe were living in or around Queens, New York at the time they were murdered, but they may not have been born and bred there. They likely came in from elsewhere, but of course, again, we have no way of knowing that for sure. So there you go, there's 4 Jane Doe cases which need our attention, need the public attention. Maybe you recognise a tattoo they had or a scar, or maybe your parents have told you the story of someone who went missing, a long lost family member, and nobody's ever known what's happened to them. Nobody ever thinks they're the one who knows that one small piece of information that might answer a whole case, that might give somebody their identity back, that might help find a killer. But really, it is usually the smallest thing that can just, to excuse the cliche saying, blow a case wide open. Thank you so much for watching this video, and I will see you in the next one. Bye guys.